But let's take a look at SofaScore and the ratings that they've given players over the years. Messi has had 55 perfect 10 performances. You look at the next two under them, Mbappe 19. Who do we have at 18? Neymar, duh. Neymar at 18, who we don't. Let me cut you out of the conversation.
No, listen. I think that if that's a defender, then more than likely it's a yellow or a red card. There's no doubt about it. You give Messi a red card, you're the referee that gives him the red card in this game. I think that, one, you'll get beat up on social media. They're going to look at you picking on Messi. He doesn't run as much as he used to, but they all defend for him. He is the best player in the world. Ronaldo is the best player in the world. And it's been a pleasure. And like Tony said, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to enjoy it. If we get one more year out of it, and unless we get 2 more years, I'm going to sit back.
Before we get into everything, I need to show you 3 moments from this podcast that I genuinely could not stop thinking about after I watched it. The first one is a statistic, a single number that, when you see it sitting next to another number, makes the entire Messi versus Ronaldo debate feel like it was settled a long time ago and nobody bothered to tell us. 55 versus 13. Just let that sit there for a second. We will come back to it because I have things to say about what that number actually means and what its limitations are. But as a first impression, as a gut punch opening to a conversation, that is a strong one. The second moment is a controversy, a moment in the match itself that if the referee had called it differently, we would be having a completely different conversation right now. Not about hat tricks, about whether the biggest star in world football should have been sitting in the dressing room before halftime. And the third moment is the one that genuinely made me laugh out loud, because one of the panelists, in the middle of making their argument about who is the best player in the world, accidentally makes the argument for both sides simultaneously in the same sentence, and then just keeps talking like nothing happened. Yeah, we are absolutely going to talk about that, because I think that slip, as funny as it is on the surface, actually tells us something real about how people genuinely feel about these two players. And it is more interesting than most of the hot takes you will find on this topic. Stay with me because this episode is worth breaking down properly. Welcome back. Today we are reacting to the Kitas podcast, and this particular episode is their full reaction and breakdown of Lionel Messi's hat-trick performance against Algeria in Argentina's opening match of the 2025 World Cup. And I want to be upfront about what we are doing here because I think it matters. This is not a hype video. This is not me jumping up and down because Messi scored 3 goals and wearing a number 10 shirt and pointing at the camera. What I want to do today is take a genuinely serious look at what this panel said, examine the arguments they made, apply some scrutiny where the analysis gets loose, push back where I think they got things wrong, and give real credit where they got things right. Because this podcast covered a lot of ground, and some of it was genuinely excellent, and some of it was the kind of thing that sounds good in the moment, but does not hold up when you think about it for more than 30 seconds. The episode raises 3 major questions. First, is Lionel Messi still the best player in the world at 38 years old, playing in MLS, coming off a hamstring concern at a World Cup? Second, did he receive preferential treatment from the referee during that match, and if so, does that matter? And third, is FIFA, under Gianni Infantino, running this tournament in a way that prioritizes entertainment over the consistent application of the laws of the game? Those are big questions. They deserve serious answers. The panel on this podcast tackles all 3, and the quality of their analysis varies across the 3 topics in ways that I think are worth examining in detail. Let us start at the beginning, the performance itself. And let us hear what the panel had to say the moment they tried to find words for what Messi did on that pitch. Okay, so I want to start with something that I think gets genuinely lost in all of the Messi coverage, and that is how physically extraordinary this performance was, not just in terms of what he did, but in
I mean, we could do Messi trivia. I'm going to go mind-blowing because at 38 years old, we know what Messi can do. There's concern about the hamstring. The hamstring's okay. Fellas, we can agree with that. But my mind was blown at just the ease at which he was able to get the hat trick. He did whatever he wanted. And you see him. How many players do you know in world football at 38, he's about to turn 39 in a week from today, that just score a hat trick, and you see him in the presser, and it's just another day at the office for Messi. It's ridiculous. I think we're running out of words for him.
Unsurprisingly brilliant on the night, in the game, all one word. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
In terms of the context in which he did it. We are talking about a professional footballer who is 38 years old, who had a publicly known hamstring concern heading into this tournament, who plays his club football in Major League Soccer, a league that a significant portion of the global football community has spent the last 2 years dismissing as a retirement home for players who can no longer compete at the highest level, and who walked into the opening match of a World Cup and scored a hat trick while looking like the most relaxed, most composed, most naturally gifted player on the pitch. Not comfortable for his age, not impressive given the circumstances, comfortable, full stop, impressive by any standard, at any age, in any competition. The panel makes a point here that I think is exactly right, the ease of it. That is the thing that defies rational processing. When you watch a player like Kylian Mbappe score a hat trick, or Erling Haaland score a hat trick, you see the physical machinery at work. You see the acceleration, the explosive movement, the raw athletic engine driving the output, and it is spectacular. But it reads as the product of exceptional physical gifts being applied at maximum intensity. With Messi, what you see is something closer to inevitability. It does not look like effort. It looks like he decided before the match started how the evening was going to go, and then he went out and made it happen. The goals were not a surprise to him. They were an outcome he had already anticipated. At 38 years old, with a dodgy hamstring, in a World Cup match, against a team that was watching him, marking him, trying specifically to deny him the spaces and moments that he has spent 2 decades exploiting. And they still could not stop it. The panel says at this point that they are running out of words for him. I understand that feeling, and I would not call it lazy, because when you have been watching someone for 20 years and they keep doing things that exceed what you thought was possible, the vocabulary of football analysis does eventually start to buckle under the weight of trying to describe it. But I actually think there are very precise and very interesting things still to be said about this performance, and the panel does get to some of them later in the episode. One of the hosts draws a distinction between how we measure Messi and how we measure other elite players. The idea that with Haaland we are always going to use the numbers as our primary barometer, while with Messi we use something more like an eye test, an elegance test, a barometer of constant creative involvement in the game. That is a more sophisticated framework than most football discourse allows for, and I want to come back to it. But first, the hard data. Because they brought out the numbers, and honestly, the numbers do all the talking. Right. So, 55 perfect 10 performances from Messi on SofaScore, Mbappe on 19, Neymar on 18, Ronaldo on 13. The panel's response is that it speaks for itself, and I understand why they say that, because the gap between 55 and 13 is not a close call. That is not one player narrowly.
But let's take a look at SofaScore and the ratings that they've given players over the years. Messi has had 55 perfect 10 performances. You look at the next two under them, Mbappe 19. Who do we have at 18? Neymar, duh. Neymar at 18, who we don't see on here. Cristiano Ronaldo has 13. So, I mean, it speaks for itself, Lahoud.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be as kind as you guys are. I think there's no debate for me. Lionel Messi can check one thing. It's his pocket, which has a World Cup in it, as well as Champions League trophies that Ronaldo does have. But when it comes to just doing what he's doing, Lionel Messi's
another. That is a different order of magnitude. But I want to be intellectually honest here, because I think any serious analysis of a statistic like this requires some engagement with what the statistic is actually measuring. SofaScore ratings are not handed down from a neutral arbiter with perfect knowledge of the game. They are generated by an algorithm that weights different types of actions: key passes, successful dribbles, goals, assists, tackles, interceptions, and produces a composite score. And the design of that algorithm will naturally favor players who are constantly on the ball and constantly involved in the attacking and creative phases of the game. A player who scores one brilliant match-winning goal from outside the box and does relatively little else might receive a 7 or an 8. A player who is on the ball 40 or 50 times, completes multiple key passes, wins duels, scores, and assists, receives a 10. Messi, by the very nature of how he plays football, positioned in space to receive the ball constantly, involved in the build-up for nearly every attacking move his team makes, dribbling past players, playing 1-2s, arriving late into the box, is structurally positioned to score highly on this kind of metric in a way that a more narrowly defined striker simply is not. So comparing his 55 10s to Ronaldo's 13, without acknowledging that their roles and styles of play produce fundamentally different interaction patterns with the ball is not quite the clean knockout blow the panel presents it as. Having said all of that, I still think 55 versus 13 is a meaningful signal. Even adjusting for those methodological differences, even granting Ronaldo every reasonable caveat about playing style and role, the gap is large enough to suggest that it is not simply an artifact of the algorithm. It reflects something real about the frequency with which Messi produces complete, comprehensive, elite-level performances, the kind of performances where not just the goals but the entire game is elevated by his presence and involvement. And now the moment I mentioned in the hook, the panelist who says Messi is the best player in the world and Ronaldo is the best player in the world in the same breath, without any apparent awareness that these two statements are in tension with each other. I found this genuinely funny, but I also think it is revealing. There is something very human about the reluctance to fully close the door on Ronaldo in the middle of a conversation about how extraordinary Messi is. The two players have been so intertwined in the discourse of this sport for so long that even the people who clearly believe Messi is on another level still hesitate to say it with absolute finality. That ambivalence, to me, is more honest than the people who draw hard lines. Football is not a simple sport, and the greatest of all time conversation is not a simple conversation. But the performance was not the only talking point from that match, because the performance wasn't the only thing worth discussing, because there was one moment that could have completely changed everything we are now talking about. This is the section of the podcast that I think is most valuable, and I want to give the panel genuine credit for it. Because it would have been very, very easy, in a show that is clearly enthusiastic about Messi, recorded in the
Yellow card in that game, and it would have completely changed everything we're talking about now, Marcelo.
I didn't see it.
Let me cut you out of the conversation.
No, listen. I think that if that's a defender, then more than likely it's a yellow or a red card. There's no doubt about it. You give Messi a red card, you're the referee that gives him the red card in this game. I think that, one, you'll get beat up on social media. They're going to look at your picking on Messi. Does he get treated differently? 100%. Just like Ronaldo, just like Mbappe, just like Zidane did in the old days. You want to keep going. So there's a little bit more of a lenient, we'll say, rule for Messi, I feel. And it's because we want to see guys like that on the field. So I think was it on purpose? That's the question. Was it malicious? That's the intention of the referees. They've got to make that decision. You know what I mean? I have a hard time believing that you were going to give him a red card for that.
One thing also people were saying is that the ref was consistent with his call.
The immediate glow of an extraordinary hat-trick performance, to either ignore this incident entirely or dismiss it as a minor detail. Instead, they leaned into it. They asked the hard question, and the conclusion they reached, that Messi almost certainly received a degree of preferential treatment from the referee, is the correct conclusion, and saying it out loud in that context takes a certain intellectual honesty. Let us be precise about what is being argued here. The panel is not saying that Messi deliberately tried to injure anyone. They are not saying he is a dirty player. What they are saying is that the action he committed, the challenge, the physical intervention, whatever you want to call it, was the kind of action that, had it been committed by a player without Messi's stature and global significance, would have resulted in a card. Possibly yellow, possibly red, depending on the referee's interpretation. And the reason it did not result in a card is at least partly because referees, human beings, subject to the same psychological pressures and biases as anyone else, are extremely reluctant to be the person who sends Lionel Messi off in the opening match of the World Cup. Think about what that decision would mean for the referee who makes it. Social media, global scrutiny, the narrative of the tournament potentially derailed before it has properly started. The person who ended Messi's World Cup in the 55th minute of his first game. That is an enormous amount of psychological weight to carry into a split-second decision, and I think it is entirely plausible that weight influenced the outcome. One panelist offers a counter-argument worth taking seriously. Maybe the referee was just being consistent with his own standard for that specific match. If he had decided early on to let the game flow and not card players for physical challenges, then applying that same standard to Messi is not preferential treatment. It is consistency within a defined approach for that game. That is a fair point. Referees do set different tones in different matches, and a consistent internal standard, even if it differs from the global standard, is not the same thing as special treatment. But then another panelist lands the counter. Montes in Mexico got a red card for less than what Messi did. And that is the argument that is hardest to answer. Because if the standard within this tournament has already demonstrated inconsistency, with some players being carded and others not for comparable or lesser challenges, then the consistency defense collapses. You cannot argue that the referee was being consistent when the broader tournament record shows that consistency is not being applied across the board. And the panel pushed further than just one referee's decision. They went all the way up to the top. This is the most provocative claim in the entire episode, and I want to take it seriously rather than either dismissing it or amplifying it uncritically, because there is a meaningful difference between two different accusations.
I think Gianni Infantino is going to make it up as he goes, because it's more about the entertainment value of this World Cup. I think that's what FIFA is so committed to. And look, we're entertained today. We're talking about one of the most entertaining performances.
I think we were talking about it. The referee have been consistent.
Yeah.
And I like it. When there's a shoulder drop, he dropped it, the guy went flying, he didn't call a foul. He let them.
That can sound similar, but are actually quite different in their implications. The first accusation is individual referees in this tournament have been inconsistent in how they apply the laws of the game, and some of that inconsistency has tended to benefit the most famous players. That is a relatively modest claim. It happens in every major football tournament. It is worth noting. It is worth criticizing. But it does not necessarily imply any kind of top-down instruction or institutional corruption. The second accusation is the one the panel is making here, that FIFA, under Gianni Infantino, is consciously and deliberately managing the officiating of this World Cup with entertainment value as a primary objective, and that the consistent application of the laws of the game is being treated as a secondary concern when it conflicts with that objective. That is a much bigger claim. That is a claim about institutional corruption at the highest level of the sport's governing body, and it deserves to be evaluated carefully before being accepted. What is the evidence? The panel cites Messi's escaped card. They cite the fact that Ronaldo had a red card in a previous match that was subsequently wiped, allowing him to continue in the tournament. They cite the general pattern of star players being handled differently to less prominent players across multiple matches and multiple refereeing teams. And they cite the broader context of how Infantino has spoken about this World Cup, the emphasis on entertainment, on spectacle, on making this the greatest World Cup in history. Now, none of that constitutes direct evidence of top-down instructions to referees to protect certain players. What it constitutes is a pattern of outcomes that is consistent with such instructions having been given, and also consistent with the simpler explanation that referees are human beings who are influenced by the same cultural pressures as everyone else, and who, when facing a decision about a global superstar in a high-pressure moment, will sometimes lean in the direction that generates less controversy for them personally. Those two explanations can produce identical outcomes, and without evidence of explicit instruction, it is very hard to distinguish between them. What I will say is this: the panel is right to name the pattern. Even if the explanation is the more mundane one, biased human beings rather than corrupt institutions, naming the pattern is important. Because the pattern, if it persists and is not addressed, damages the integrity of the competition, and the integrity of the competition is ultimately the only thing that gives the competition its meaning. Now let me bring this back to where it should end, on the football itself. Because underneath all the numbers and the controversy and the institutional critique, there is still the simple and extraordinary fact of what Messi actually did on that pitch. And if you want to understand what truly separates him from every other player at this tournament,
There was a moment, I think it was in the second half, where maybe in the 60-something minute, 65th minute, where Enzo Fernandez is made a run into the box. He's already made the run 5 seconds before. Messi touches the ball, has his head up, he hits it. Fernandez still has time to kind of calculate his run, for lack of a better term, and the ball lands right at his feet in front of goal.
You don't have to calculate anything with Messi.
Absolutely. So for me, just you look at the players at this World Cup, and there's some great players. Kylian Mbappe, great player. Michael Olise, which we'll get into.
Finisher. I don't know about great player.
Yeah, this is interesting you say this. Go ahead.
Next piece of analysis from the panel is the clearest explanation I have heard. This breakdown of the assist to Enzo Fernandez is, for me, the single best moment of analysis in the entire podcast, and I want to spend real time on it because what is being described here is something that I think is genuinely difficult to communicate to people who have not thought carefully about the cognitive demands of elite football. Fernandez makes his run into the box. He makes it 5 seconds before Messi even touches the ball. Messi then plays the pass, not to where Fernandez is, but to where Fernandez is going to be. And because the ball takes a brief moment to travel, Fernandez actually has time to make a small adjustment to his run before it arrives, recalibrating his position to meet the ball, and the ball still lands perfectly at his feet in front of goal. Now, unpack that sequence. For Messi to play that pass at that moment, he had to have already decided, before Fernandez had completed his run, before the space in front of goal had fully opened, that the pass was the right one and that Fernandez was going to be in the right position to receive it. That means he was not reacting to what was in front of him, and he was anticipating what was about to be in front of him. He was running a mental model of the game, of where every player on the pitch was going, of how the defensive structure was going to shift, of what space was going to open and when. That allowed him to commit to a decision before the decision's viability was visually apparent to anyone else on the pitch. That is not a technical skill in the conventional sense. You can improve your passing technique on a training pitch. You can sharpen your finishing. You can develop your dribbling. But what Messi is demonstrating in that moment, the ability to process spatial and temporal information about a complex, dynamic, rapidly changing environment at a level of detail and speed that exceeds what other elite footballers can do. That is something closer to a neurological gift, a form of spatial intelligence that operates at a speed and resolution that simply is not accessible to other players, regardless of how hard they train or how well they are coached. And here is the thing that makes this so remarkable in the context of the broader conversation about Messi's age and his future, and whether he is still the best player in the world. Physical attributes decline with age, speed declines, explosiveness declines, stamina declines. But there is evidence from cognitive science, from sports psychology, from the careers of the greatest strategic minds in team sports, that this kind of anticipatory spatial intelligence does not decline at the same rate. In some cases, it actually improves with experience. The pattern recognition gets faster because the database of patterns is larger. The anticipation is more accurate because it has been tested and refined over 2 decades of the highest level competition. Messi is not defying aging by maintaining the physical attributes of a younger player. He is transcending the physical requirements of football by operating at a level of cognitive sophistication that reduces the amount of physical work he needs to do. He does not have to sprint because he is already in the right place. He does not have to press because he already knows where the ball is going. He does not have to react because he has already anticipated. And that is the story that the panel is circling around throughout this entire episode without quite landing on it in those terms. The eye test that they contrast with the numbers test for Haaland, what they are really describing is the difference between a player whose excellence is physical and a player whose excellence is cognitive. And cognitive excellence in this particular sport is both harder to measure and harder to stop. So let me bring all of this together. What did the Kitas podcast get right? What did they get wrong? And what is the honest takeaway from this episode? What they got right. The central argument that Messi's performance against Algeria was historically significant, not just impressive in isolation, but significant in terms of what it tells us about the outer limits of what is possible for a footballer at this stage of a career. The distinction between the eye test barometer for Messi and the numbers barometer for players like Haaland is a genuinely useful analytical frame. The honest acknowledgement that Messi received preferential treatment from the referee is both correct and brave given the enthusiastic tone of the show. The willingness to implicate FIFA as an institution, rather than just shrugging at one referee's decision, reflects a level of structural thinking that is rarer than it should be in football media. And the breakdown of the Fernandez assist is the clearest illustration I have seen of what Messi's anticipatory intelligence actually looks like in practice. What they got wrong, or at least left underdeveloped, the SofaScore data was presented as self-evident proof when it actually requires more contextual qualification than they gave it. 55 versus 13 is a meaningful signal, but it is not a simple or neutral measurement, and saying it speaks for itself is the kind of rhetorical shortcut that substitutes the impression of analysis for actual analysis. The Messi-Ronaldo comparison deserved more precision in general, because the argument is strong enough to make properly without relying on a metric that has structural biases built into it. And the moment where the panelists declared both players the best in the world simultaneously is funny, but it also points to a broader tendency in this conversation to reach for superlatives without fully committing to the logical consequences of the claims being made. My overall assessment: this is a good podcast episode. It is enthusiastic, without being uncritical. It covers serious ground. It is willing to complicate its own celebrations with genuine scrutiny of what happened in that match beyond the goals. And it raises questions about refereeing integrity and FIFA's institutional priorities that deserve far more mainstream attention than they typically receive. On the central question, is Messi still the best player in the world at 38? My honest answer, based on the evidence of this tournament so far and the analysis in this episode, is yes, not by virtue of what he used to be, not as a lifetime achievement recognition. By virtue of what he is actually doing right now in this competition against this opposition under this pressure, the evidence supports the conclusion. But the more interesting question to me is not whether he is the best. It is what it means for the sport that a player of this age, with this injury history and this phase of his career, can perform at this level on the biggest stage in the game. It means the ceiling we thought existed for footballers in their late 30s is not where we thought it was. It means that the relationship between physical decline and footballing effectiveness is more complex than simple models of athletic aging allow for. And it means that the next generation of players and the coaches who develop them and the scientists who support them has reason to think very differently about what the tail end of a great career can look like. Messi is not hanging on. He is showing us something new about what is possible. And whatever happens for the rest of this tournament, that alone makes this World Cup worth watching. Drop a comment below with your take on the 3 questions this episode raised. Is Messi still the best player in the world? Did the referee get the call wrong? And do you think FIFA is managing this tournament in a way that prioritizes entertainment over sporting integrity? I genuinely want to know where you land on all 3. Subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in the next one.